Ladies and gentlemen, the postseason is upon us. Say bye-bye to the regular season. Say bye-bye to the conference championship games. Folks, it is now time. We are on the path to a national championship, possibly the second consecutive Big Ten national championship. We're going to break down the college football playoff matchups. We're going to even talk about bowl matchups as well. And we've got the newest member to the Big Ten head coaching fraternity. Let's go around this big old nation.
From Pasadena to Piscataway, College Park to the Coliseum, Seattle to State College, Columbus to Camp Randall, the Zoo to the Rock, and everywhere in between. This is where Big Ten fans gather to talk America's premier national conference with your host, Big Ten Ted. All Big Ten, all year long. This is Big Nation.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have college football playoff brackets. And the first of its kind, the first 12-team college football playoff bracket. Now, just seeing it in its form, we've been talking about this thing for years and years and years, and now it's finally upon us, and it's great to finally see these matchups, and it's great to finally really take this one in. We are live here on a Sunday night, December 8th. Hope everybody out there is doing well. Hope you're enjoying this live edition of Big Nation. Boy, I haven't done live streams for 6 months, 7 months. Did one last night, went off fairly well, and they say, hey, why don't we come on here on a Sunday night? Let's talk some Big Ten college football playoff matchups. Let's talk some bowl matchups. Let's talk all of this stuff. Purdue has a new head coach. Let's chat about all of it certainly tonight. Here's where I want to start out with, though. I want to first start out with talking, of course, about the college football playoff. The college football playoff format was not built for this era of college football. Plain and simple. A lot of people had a lot of things to say when the final bracket was unveiled. Now, a lot of people were saying a lot of these things in these projected bracket reveals that we had certainly been seeing in the weeks leading up to Selection Sunday. But now that we see it, now that we know exactly where certain teams are going, now it hits a little bit different, doesn't it? And I said this last night when we kind of started to really find out where some of these teams were projected to go, where things were really starting to slide in. That this was a bracket, this was a playoff format that was built when Texas was still in the Big 12, when Oregon was still in the Pac-12, heck, when the Pac-12 still existed. Okay, remember, this was originally a 6+6 format. And now they flipped it over to 5+7. And when we had those Power 5 conferences, okay, you had certainly some big teams in the Big Ten. You certainly had some big teams in the SEC, like of course we do now. But you also had some significant programs in the Pac-12. You had some significant programs certainly in the Big 12. And maybe the distribution of power was distributed a little bit more across college football. But now that we look at it, now that we really have our eyes on this and what exactly it's looking like in the current model of college football, this is not a playoff that was built for the Power 2 era. This was a playoff format that was built for the Power 5 era. Now, there might be some of you out there saying, wait a minute, Ted, it's the Power 4, it's not the Power 4. It's not the Power 4. Look, I love watching Big 12 football, the chaos, the craziness that is Big 12 football, but there is a clear and obvious divide between the Big 10 and the SEC up here. This is what happens when you have consolidated the power players in the Big 10 and the SEC, okay, when you have moved those programs up to those two conferences and you have clearly separated them up there, and then you have the Big 12 and then you have the ACC. When you have the guaranteed top 4 conference champions getting those byes, this is the type of situation that you're going to get. Where you have a Boise State and an Arizona State, all love to Kenny Dillingham and the Sun Devils. Cam Scatterbo is a great player. Ashton Genty is a great player, of course, there for Boise State. But in a 12-team format, it is very clear and it is very obvious that the first-round buys should go to the top 4 teams right now in college football. But it certainly doesn't stand that way. And the way that these matchups really end up being displayed, it kind of gives rewards to maybe teams that shouldn't have certain rewards. We'll get into that certainly a little bit later. So where does this all lead to? It leads to 2026 is where it all leads to. Now, maybe I'm not sure if they can make any sort of these changes, these significant of changes for the 2025 season, but it leads us to 2026 when the college football playoff format can be changed. I think it's clear we could see a 14-team playoff with the top 2 teams, which would be the buys as the Big Ten champion and the SEC champion. You could word it as the top 2 conference champions get buys in that specific format in 2026. The 4-4-2-2-1-1 has been thrown out there as well with a guaranteed number of spots for each conference, and that's certainly something that could be very interesting because that specific format kind of takes away the committee a little bit, and you have maybe conference play-in games to create more revenue from the conference level. We all know this is financially based, but that is something that could also be thrown out there as well. Whatever it is, it's going to change. It's going to change in 2026. That is kind of one of the after effects and one of the aftershocks of seeing a Boise State as the number 3 seed in the college football playoff. But this is what we have, and this is kind of what we're dealing with right now. Let's talk Big Ten. Let's talk some matchups in this great college football playoff. Let's talk first about the game that's going to be before anybody else. It is the very first game of the college football playoff. It's going to go down Friday, December 20th, when the number 10 seed Indiana Hoosiers travel. They go on the road to take on the 7 seed Notre Dame Fighting Irish for the Indiana State Championship. Both of these teams hung 60 plus on the other power team in the state of Indiana, that being the Purdue Boilermakers, which they were not a good team. But anyway, here we are battling for the state championship of the state of Indiana. You know, when I really start first to break down this matchup between the Hoosiers and the Fighting Irish right now, I think Notre Dame presents a little bit of a difficult matchup for Indiana. When you looked at Indiana and you saw how they played against Michigan, when you saw how they played against Ohio State, when you saw teams that were built really well to great in the trenches, that's where Indiana maybe showed their first couple of bumps in the road as a football team this season. Look at what that Michigan defensive line did against Indiana's offense, right? They held them to just 20 points in that game. The Hoosiers won 20-15 over Michigan. And then, of course, you have that Ohio State game where the Buckeyes just kept on coming. They just kept on coming, and they just kept on coming, man. Curtis Rourke and this offense was completely out of rhythm because they just couldn't protect. Notre Dame has a pretty good defensive line, but I think they're better in the trenches on the other side of the ball. This is one of the best rushing attacks in all of college football. They've got a great run blocking offensive line. You look at Jeremiah Love, you look at Jadarian Price, of course, Riley Leonard gets involved in the run game as well. This is good. Now, I know Indiana, statistically, Indiana looks pretty good against the run, but I think that this is going to be a big challenge for the Hoosiers in this game. I think both of these teams kind of want to play a little bit differently. I think Notre Dame, of course, what do they want to do? They want to be physical. They want to run the ball. They want to control the line of scrimmage, and it really fits. I mean, it fits in well, certainly, to what they already are, but it fits in well to game planning against Indiana. That's why I said that this is a little bit of a difficult matchup. Going on the road to South Bend, Indiana certainly takes it up another notch as well. But when I look at this thing from Indiana's standpoint, when I look at it from a Hoosier perspective, we need to try to replicate what USC was able to replicate in bits and pieces of that last regular season game between the Fighting Irish and the Trojans. Jade Maeva threw for 360 yards against this Notre Dame secondary. Now, Notre Dame statistically, a lot of this season, they've been pretty good against the pass, but USC was able to find, they were able to keep on coming back, and if it weren't for a couple of late turnovers, USC was going toe-to-toe with Notre Dame late in that game. They were coming back, and they were making this a really competitive ball game. We know what Indiana wants to do, right? We know what Curtis Rourke and company are really comfortable with, right? They want to open it up. I think that they want to create explosive plays against Notre Dame, make the Irish kind of score and try to play that back and forth kind of game. Hey, I said that about Penn State playing against Oregon, and Penn State was able to do it. I think Notre Dame, and you look at what Notre Dame was able to do scoring-wise in that game against the USC Trojans. So I think Notre Dame can score, but you get into if Indiana gets into a slugfest against a team like Notre Dame, that's not going to go well for Indiana. So they got to find a way to get the ball out on the perimeter. They got to find a way to create some explosive plays down the field so Curtis Rourke and this offense can be playing at their best. But I think it's going to be tough. I think Notre Dame, just in a lot of different ways, presents a difficult matchup right now for the Indiana Hoosiers. Let's go on and talk about the next first-round game, that being the number 11 seed, the SMU Mustangs, the Old Ponies, the ACC runner-ups. They are going to Happy Valley to take on the 6th-ranked Nittany Lions of Penn State. Man, you get to this situation, you get to the playoff, you get a home game. Penn State gets a home game. Everybody in Happy Valley is like, all right, yeah, we wanted to win the Big Ten championship game. No doubt. They wanted to have that first-round bye. They wanted to be playing in the Rose Bowl game. But you get a playoff game, home game. That's great. And it gets stuck at noon. Man, a great potential for maybe a whiteout nighttime type of atmosphere. Heck, maybe they'd even throw them in the mid-afternoon. Nope. When Fox is not involved, they find a way to still be involved, right? With this old big noon kickoff for the Penn State Nittany Lions. But it was a great atmosphere at noon earlier this season against the Ohio State Buckeyes. It's going to be a great atmosphere for this playoff game against the SMU Mustangs. I have absolutely no doubt about that. What I said of the Big Ten championship reaction that I had here, Penn State needs to play, maybe not defensively, right? But that's a really good Oregon offense. They're going to put up a lot of yards and a lot of points on anybody they play. But when I look at offensively for Penn State in that Big Ten championship game, you need to find a way to keep on playing like that. Your offensive line needs to find a way to keep on playing like that. Your run game needs to find a way to keep on playing like that. Drew Aller, Tyler Warren, Harrison Wallace, you go down the list. They need to keep on finding ways to continue to play like that. If this is what we can expect offensively from the Penn State Nittany Lions, this is a team that can make an extremely deep run, ladies and gentlemen, here in the college football playoff. So we know about Penn State here in Big Ten country. What about those Mustangs? This is a balanced but explosive offense over there in the ACC. Quarterback Kevin Jennings, over 3,000 yards, 22 touchdowns, 8 interceptions. The season really started with Preston Stone, but he certainly has come in and he certainly played well. Brashard Smith is a really good running back as well for the Mustangs. I talk about balance, right? This is a team that throws the football 30, 35 times a game, but they also run the football, and they run the football really well right now. As I mentioned with Brashard Smith, over 1,200 yards and 12 touchdowns this season. I think they lean a little bit more into the pass game than they do the run game, but as you can tell from those statistics, they can still run the football fairly effectively. There is a large drop-off after Brashard Smith, so also keep that in mind as well. So here's another thing to keep in mind that when I was really starting to look, when I was really starting to research things right now, this is an SMU offensive line that's been pretty good in pass protection so far this season, right? They've only allowed 15 sacks. 15 sacks, and we know all about that Penn State pass rush. We know all about that Penn State defensive line, and you know that they're going to want to wreak havoc. They're going to want to get SMU into bad situations behind the sticks. Then those are great situations for Penn State to be able to pin their rear back, and go after the passer. SMU, solid defense, 28th in the country in scoring defense. Like, you can throw all of these things out there about the Southern Methodist University Mustangs. But I look up and down SMU's schedule, and then I look at Penn State. SMU has not played a team like Penn State. They have not played a team with the size, with the speed, with the athleticism. They have not played a Big Ten team, an elite, a very good type of Big Ten football team like the Penn State Nittany Lions. But Penn State, they've seen teams like SMU. They've seen teams better than SMU. Look at the Oregon Ducks in what they were able to do in that specific football game. Penn State has been competitive in every single game this season. With that home crowd behind them, I think that this is a difficult spot for the Mustangs coming into this situation, coming off of that last-second field goal loss to the Clemson Tigers. I think Penn State, I'm not a moral victory guy. I hate the concept of a moral victory. You play to win the game, as Herm Edwards said all those years ago. But when I look at that Penn State performance against the Oregon Ducks, the top team, the national championship favorite, not according to Vegas for some godforsaken reason, but in my opinion, the team that I think is best suited to win the national championship in the Oregon Ducks, the way that Penn State played against them and the matchups against SMU, yeah, I think Penn State certainly, of course, has an advantage in that particular football game. All right, let's go to the last first-round game that a Big Ten team will be playing, and it is the 8-9 game, and it features the Tennessee Volunteers. They're the 9 seed. They go on the road to face off against the number 8 seed, that being the Ohio State Buckeyes this Saturday, December 21st kickoff. You can break down players, you can break down schemes, you can break down advantages, you can break down disadvantages. But when I look at this specific matchup, when you look at it from the scarlet and gray perspective, it's all between the ears. Where is Ohio State mentally? Does Ryan Day have this team multiple weeks removed from that Michigan game? Are the Michigan Wolverines still living in the head of the Ohio State Buckeyes? Is that loss to Michigan a loss that can possibly beat Ohio State twice? That's, I think, the big thing, because we've seen it all year long. When Ohio State is Ohio State, when the Buckeyes are playing great football, they're a great football team. They're one of the best football teams in America. They are a national championship caliber team, but when they're playing and play calling like they are in that game against the Michigan Wolverines, and that clear mental block that Ryan Day and this entire program has, that is not a recipe for Ohio State success, certainly right now. We know about the injuries on the Ohio State offensive line. They take on a really good defense right now in the Tennessee Volunteers out of there in the SEC. So when you start to look at Tennessee, of course, coached by Josh Heupel, Nico Iamaleava, he maybe hasn't been the superstar, dark horse Heisman candidate type of guy that we maybe expected earlier in the season. Nico has thrown for over 2,500 yards, 19 touchdowns, and 5 interceptions. But maybe a reason why is because of what they've been able to do out of the backfield with a guy named Dylan Sampson. And that is somebody that Ohio State has to find a way to stop. Tennessee, if you're kind of coming from Big Ten country, which if you're watching this channel, if you're watching this show, of course you are, right? When you think of Tennessee, you might think of that great team a couple of years ago where they threw the ball up and down the field when Hendon Hooker was the quarterback and they had that great offense. I think it's a little bit different for the Volunteers this season. I mentioned Dylan Sampson. He's 8th in the country in rushing yards this season on the ground. So that interior defensive line needs to be able to play well. Tylik Williams needs to play well. Ty Hamilton certainly needs to be able to play well in the middle of this Ohio State defensive line. That's got to be the main key for Jim Knowles. Hey, if we're able to contain this run game, if we're able to stop this run game, hey, we know Nico can throw the football, and they do have some weapons. certainly down the field as well. But considering of what we've seen from the Tennessee Volunteers this season and what the production that Dylan Sampson has put up this season, Ohio State is feeling a lot better if they can keep Dylan Sampson right around 100 yards or under 100 yards. If they can play that typical type of Ohio State defensive line type of game where they're clogging up the middle. And look, they need to get better production out of JT Tuimoloau. They need to get better production certainly out of Jack Sawyer coming off the edge as well against this Tennessee offensive line. You look to the other side of the ball, Tennessee's got a good defense, folks. They've got a really good defense. Run game and defense. That's the name of the game right now for Josh Heupel. They are 4th in the country in total defense. Of course, James Pierce, 7.5 sacks this season up front on the defensive line. He leads Tennessee there. Jermod McCoy and Will Brooks have combined for 7 interceptions this season as well. So where is Ohio State's offense? The last time we saw the Buckeyes on the football field on offense, they were running the ball up the middle, and they were getting stuffed up the middle. And the play calling didn't exactly exert a lot of confidence in Will Howard, right? So I want to see Ohio State get back to Ohio State. I want to see them be balanced. Let's take advantage of Jeremiah Smith down the field. Let's take advantage of Emeka Egbuka down the field. Let's take advantage of all of those types of weapons that the Ohio State Buckeyes have down the field, right? If they can keep this Tennessee defense off balance, and I don't think they're going to put up a ton of points. Like, are they going to put up 35 points against Tennessee? I don't think that's going to happen. I'm pretty in the dark, to be honest with you, on Ohio State. I'm not quite sure where this team sits right now because the last time we saw them, they were certainly not looking very good against the Michigan Wolverines. This is going to be a fantastic and a very interesting matchup in the first round. The winner will punch their ticket to the Rose Bowl to face off against the top-seeded Oregon Ducks. We've got 3 really big first-round matchups on the channel. We're going to have this one covered on Friday night, Indiana and Notre Dame. That's going to happen in a couple of weeks. And the good thing about this is you've got the noon game with Penn State taking on SMU, and then the mid-afternoon is the non-Big Ten game, and then the night game is this, the Tennessee Volunteers taking on the Ohio State Buckeyes. It should certainly be a lot of fun. Let's dive into some possibilities right now, and let's go back to the bracket. Here. Why don't we? If I can, I might have to do this in a little bit of a reverse order. There we go. The bracket is back up on screen. A little bit of a graphic malfunction from yours truly. But here we are. Let's talk about the possibilities and maybe some of the matchups. Do they favor some Big Ten teams? Do they not favor some Big Ten teams? Let's dive into it certainly a little bit more. We talked about those 3 first-round matchups right now. Let's start first let's talk about Penn State, because I think that's one big talking point. The Big Ten championship loser, not the winner, the Big Ten championship loser has an easier path to the college football playoff semifinals than the Big Ten champion does as the number 1 seed. When I talked about at the beginning of all of this, okay, when I talked about the format and how this format was not built for the Power 2 era, this is Exhibit 1A. When we start the proceedings in the courtroom, this is the first thing that they talk about, where Penn State playing SMU and Boise State on their road to the Orange Bowl in the college football playoff semifinal. So Penn State's going to be Vegas favorites, of course, in both of those games. I think they're going to be a bigger Vegas favorite for the Boise State game than they will be for the SMU game. What do we know about Boise State? Let's just keep Ashton Jeanty under like 250 yards, right? If we do that, the rest of Boise State is not very good. The Broncos have been in some precarious situations later on in their Mountain West schedule, so I'm not overly sold on Boise State, even on a neutral field, even being a little bit closer to Bronco country. I am not overly sold on Boise State being able to give Penn State any sort of significant pushback over there. Now let's look to the bottom half of the bracket, right, where you have number 7 Notre Dame, you have number 10 Indiana. Now, I talked about the difficult matchup that exists for the Hoosiers. Like, if the Hoosiers are able to get past Notre Dame, like Georgia, like we talk about Notre Dame not exactly being the best matchup for Indiana. Georgia is a really bad matchup because Georgia's got a really good defense. Georgia's got a really good defensive line. And what did we say before about Indiana? They've had a trouble blocking really good defensive lines like Michigan and Ohio State. Georgia would not be good. So, yeah, as much as I would love to see Indiana pull that upset and continue to win right now, I just don't see it happening on their way to the Orange Bowl. Certainly right now over there. But so that would set up a Notre Dame-Georgia matchup in the Sugar Bowl, which would be on New Year's Day to punch their ticket to the semifinals. Is there? Watch out for, like, when I look at Notre Dame, I like the way Notre Dame is built. Like, Notre Dame isn't exactly a sexy team, right? But they run the football extremely well. Riley Leonard, he's not the greatest quarterback, of course, in college football, but he can make plays in big situations. This team certainly learned a lot from that Northern Illinois loss, and they've looked good, I think, the rest of the season. And then what do we know about Georgia? Of course, in the SEC championship game, the Carson Beck injury, of course, he had the game-winning handoff in overtime as well. Gunnar Stockton was in there, and he's able to kind of scoot around and certainly make some plays. But, hey, if things kind of break a certain way, it would not be ultra surprising to me if Notre Dame is maybe able to beat Georgia in that specific situation, because I have not been sold by this Georgia offense really all year long. Of course, they're really dependent on their defense right now. I mean, that was a defensive slugfest. That was a Big Ten West type of looking game in the SEC championship between the Texas Longhorns and the Georgia Bulldogs right now. But the point I'm trying to make is, what is the match? Like, if Penn State is able to not avoid a big upset, they're able to get to the Orange Bowl, they're able to get to the college football playoff semifinals. What about the potential matchup with the Georgia Bulldogs or the Notre Dame Fighting Irish? Now, Oregon had a really disruptive defensive line coming into the game, and Penn State's offensive line was able to handle them pretty well. Now, can they replicate that type of offensive line performance against a possible matchup against Georgia? That remains to be seen. I think a lot of people out there are underselling what Penn State can do from an offensive perspective. I look at both the Fighting Irish and I look at both the Georgia Bulldogs, and I think Penn State can match up pretty well against both of those teams. I think they can match up pretty well, certainly, against both of those teams. Like, for Penn State, it comes down to just taking care of business in the first two rounds of the college football playoff, and then you're matched up against probably Georgia or Notre Dame, and you got to find a way to win in that, and then you're playing for a national championship. All this talk about James Franklin not being able to win the big game, and all of a sudden he's sitting here with a clear path to the semifinals, with a clear path to the Orange Bowl. What do we know about Penn State? What do we know? They struggle against Ohio State. They struggle against, top-ranked teams. You get in to the semifinals right now, Notre Dame, Georgia, that's your next big game. You find a way to flip that trend. You're playing for it all in Atlanta, baby. This is not out of the realm of possibility right now for Penn State. It's kind of crazy that we've gotten here, but this circles back all the way to the beginning of the show when I talked about the format. The Penn State is right at the top of the list of why this format is not a great format, but the Nittany Lions are being like, I think it's a great format. James Franklin loves the format right now. I get a home playoff game. I get Boise State in the second round. And then we're in the semifinals, and let's play a game, see if we can match up and see if we can win. You got to love it. Everybody's happy in Happy Valley. You know where they're not happy? Well, they're happy for being 13-0. They're happy for winning the Big Ten title and saying, yeah, that Big Ten conference, that's ours. That's the Oregon Ducks. That's that team out west. Let's talk about Oregon right now. They are slated to be the ultimate road warriors. Let's throw out some scenarios, because that's what we're doing right now. We're throwing out scenarios. Oregon, the number one seed, playing in the Rose Bowl. It's going to be a beautiful setting. So you play the winner of number 8 Ohio State and number 9 Tennessee. Okay? That's going to be whoever slides into that spot. I think that's going to be a challenge, right, for the Oregon Ducks. I think both teams certainly have a lot of positives to them as well. We saw what happened earlier this season. Oregon and Ohio State in Autzen Stadium playing to a 1-point game early in that one. But once you get beyond that, if they are able to get to the Final Four, if Oregon is able to get to the Cotton Bowl, this is where things get a little bit crazy. This is where the Oregon Ducks really turn into road warriors. You look at the top half of the bracket. It features Texas, Clemson, and Arizona State. I think Texas is the best team in that region of the bracket by a large margin. I know that the SEC championship wasn't ultra sexy of a football game, right? But I think the defense is playing well. I still think that's a really good football team right there in Texas. And when I see these potential matchups at home against the Clemson team, you look at Arizona State, Cam Scadaboo, Sam Leavitt, the former Michigan State Spartans quarterback. Like that's Kenny Dillingham has done a tremendous job, but when you match them up against the talent, the skill, the power, the speed of a program like Texas, I think that is certainly a very difficult matchup for the Texas Longhorns. But if Texas is able to beat Clemson, if Texas is able to beat Arizona State, they advance the Cotton Bowl. Now all of a sudden, Oregon is playing Texas in Arlington. Wait for it, Texas. And that's a home game for the Horns. That's a home game for the Horns. So Oregon, you got to go on the road. Now, when I look, this is where we maybe put the quotations, neutral field, right? In a neutral field against the Texas Longhorns, the whole story setting up right now for the Oregon Ducks is if you want to be the man, you got to beat the man. And they're going to maybe have to beat Ohio State, Texas, and Georgia on their way to a national championship. They're going to have to run through some of the biggest programs in college football right now. And if it's not Georgia at the bottom, it's probably going to be somebody like Notre Dame, which of course we know the brand recognition that Notre Dame is. So no matter who it is, Oregon going on the road to the going on the road to the Cotton Bowl, and then you look to the bottom half of the bracket. Georgia's sitting there. Where is the national championship game being played? Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta. Wait for it, Georgia. So you might play a semifinal in Texas against Texas, and you might play a national championship game against Georgia in Georgia. What a story it would be if the Oregon Ducks can go 16-0 and run through that gauntlet when you have other teams like Penn State and some of these other squads playing the teams that they are right now. I want to say this about the Oregon Ducks. I think that this is somewhat of a disrespected football team right now. I've been hearing a lot of national people say it. A lot of national people out there saying, hey, and I'm sure you guys have heard it as well. There's no great team in college football. There's no elite team in college football. Everything is wide open, and everybody's glancing across the Oregon Ducks, man. I don't think people have given Oregon their due as to what they've been able to do this season. Walking into a new conference, a Power 2 conference, beat Ohio State. You beat Michigan. I know the Wolverines were down this year. You beat Penn State in the Big Ten championship game. The first team since the 2015 Mark D'Antonio coached Michigan State Spartans to beat all three of those teams. You're making history in year one in the Big Ten Conference. They are the first team ever to beat Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State, and Michigan State in the same season. They've come into the Big Ten, and Dan Lanning has certainly, this has been a hot topic as of lately, planted his flag into the B1G certainly right now. So we'll see if they get their due, but the way maybe the media has been talking about Oregon lately and maybe not respecting them as that top team, I think like they should, this is the road this is the road that'll certainly get your respect right now. But, I feel like you look at a matchup for the Oregon Ducks in the Rose Bowl against the Ohio State Buckeyes. It's interesting because Ohio State, we saw what we saw against Michigan. The offensive line certainly maybe isn't looking as good or in rhythm. But then you look at Oregon on that side and you look what happened on their defensive line and you look at their front seven and their linebacker group and all of that, allowing nearly 300 yards rushing against Penn State. So it's hard for me to really comment a lot on Ohio State right now, because we just don't know where they're at from a headspace point of view. We don't know if Ryan Day has really gotten this team refocused as of right now. So Penn State matchups against Georgia and Notre Dame. It's going to be an opportunity at that point for James Franklin to really prove that he can win a big-time game right now. And then for the Oregon Ducks, the narrative is they are going to be the road warriors. If they can get past the Rose Bowl, it's going to be, what a rush. They are going to be the ultimate road warriors, maybe going on the road to the Cotton Bowl and going on the road. I say the road, but that's the truth. It's a neutral site, but it is going on the road. And then the national championship game against the Georgia Bulldogs. It is going to be all sorts of fun in the college football playoff. I am ready to dive into some comments for the CFP before we get into other talk about bowl games and other things, certainly as well. Let's start with Ram Spencer. What do you think? Can Notre Dame upset Georgia? I think they can. But here's the matchup in that specific matchup against the Irish and the Bulldogs. Big Ten Ted going outside of the Big Ten bubble, certainly right now. Georgia's defense, the run defense, their defensive line against Notre Dame's rushing offense. I'm not sure how Notre Dame can do if teams it's been really tough to slow down their rushing attack. It's been really tough to stop their rushing attack this season. I'm not sure what can happen if somebody does do that. And you look at Georgia offensively, have not been sold. They've been inconsistent this season. They've been a little bit up and down. Notre Dame has been pretty good defensively right now. I think Notre Dame can do it. Will they do it? We'll see. Georgia's tough. Georgia's a tough team when it comes to the national champion, or when it comes to this type of postseason, certainly as well. All right, let's see if we can dive into some other comments as well. Let's talk here from Bailey. If Oregon won the national championship, this would quite literally be the best team in college football history, and people are not going to like to hear that. Now, I'll put it a different way. I don't think that they would be the best team in college football history, right? 2001 Miami, 1995 Nebraska, 2019 LSU. Like, those were extremely explosive teams. I will say that this would be the hardest road to a national championship, which I think that's going to be the case no matter who wins the college football playoff. But it's going to be the hardest road to a national championship, I think, for the Oregon Ducks. So will it be the best team in college football history? No, but it will. I think they will feel the most accomplished in college football history, because there's a scenario where these are the last, would be 4 games? 4 games? Yeah, for Oregon. Big Ten championship game against Penn State. You win that one. The Rose Bowl against, let's say, Ohio State. Even if it's Tennessee, that's still a top 10 team. But let's say Ohio State. And then you beat Texas. And then let's say it's Georgia. So you beat Penn State, Ohio State, Texas, and Georgia as your last 4 matchups of the season. That would be a crazy run. I can see where you're coming from here, beating all of those teams consecutively. I can understand. And hey, I think being the team that's played the most amount of games and going through that type of run, hey, maybe they should be in the discussion as maybe one of the best teams of all time right now as well. That will be very interesting to see where things certainly go down the road. As well. All right, let's kind of move on and talk. We've talked college football playoff. I kind of want to move on to the next segment of the program right now. And this one is all about bowl matchups. You know, a lot of attention is going to be on the CFP, and it very well should be on the CFP. And we know that bowl games and the importance of bowl games have maybe kind of taken a little bit of a tick down, but I think it's certainly worth discussing. Like when you look at on this channel, we're going to be talking a lot about transfer portal. We're going to be talking a lot about the college football playoff. There might not be as much mention about these bowl games, but it's certainly worth discussing as well. USC gets into the Las Vegas Bowl. That's going to go down on December 27th. USC started their season in Las Vegas against an SEC team. They got a big-time win. It kind of went a little bit south season-wise after that for the Trojans. That was against LSU. This bowl game is going to go for the Texas A&M Aggies, certainly in this game. So this is a big spot for USC to be able to finish their season on a positive note. Remember last year, right, when Caleb Williams opted out of that bowl game, it was Miller Moss's opportunity to shine. And now when you look at the USC Trojans, you got a 5-star all-everything in Husan Longstreet coming in next year, and then you got Jaden Mayava. So this is Jaden Mayava's opportunity in the Las Vegas Bowl. This is his chance to be able to really prove that he can be the guy. But we might get into a situation a lot like we did last year where there might be a little bit more pressure for Husan Longstreet to be able to get in at some point in time. But if Jaden Mayava can go out in this football game and he can put up another great performance in a season-ending game like Miller Moss did last season, that could propel him to the starting quarterback job. There's a lot of questions for Lincoln Riley and this team to see what they're going to do right now at the quarterback position over there going forward. We've got the Pinstripe Bowl, Boston College taking on Nebraska. We'll see what the Huskers are going to. Man, Nebraska has taken a hit. They have taken a pounding in the transfer portal, even though right before I came on the air here, Emmett Johnson climbed back out of the portal, and he was back in a Nebraska uniform, so that's going to be big for them. Still having that 1-2 rushing tandem with Dante Dowdell and Emmett Johnson right there at the running back position, so we'll see if they can get a bowl win. Of course, carry that momentum into the season. The Rate Bowl, formerly the Guaranteed Rate Bowl, I was past that one over. Rutgers taking on Avery Johnson and the Kansas State Wildcats over there. Let's talk the Music City Bowl is going to go down on December 30th. The Missouri Tigers taking on the Iowa Hawkeyes. Now, Caleb Johnson is not going to be playing in this game for the Black and Gold. So he opts out. Missouri is 47th in the country against the run. So we know what Iowa has to do. Iowa has to be able to run the football to have success. Kamari Moulton, who was RB1 on the depth chart at the beginning of the season, gets the nod. Can they be able to run the football against them? And I think it's really hard to break down a lot of these bowl games now, a week, 2 weeks from now, before they're played, because we just don't know who's going to opt out. We know we've got Luther Burden on the roster for the Tigers, so we'll see what happens over there. But we know what it comes down to for Iowa. They got to be able to run the football. And we know what it comes down to for the Michigan Wolverines. They draw the ReliaQuest Bowl in Tampa on New Year's Eve. The Michigan Wolverines taking on the Crimson Tide of Alabama. So it's been this way all year long. Michigan has a very narrow window. They've got a very narrow path to victory. They need to run the ball really well. Their defense needs to create havoc. If they can't do either of those things, it's going to be tough for Michigan to win a football game. Of course, you've got Jalen Milroe in there at quarterback for the Alabama Crimson Tide. Now, Alabama, 60th in FBS, 60th in the country against the run this season. This is an Alabama defense that's given up a good amount of points this season, but this is a Michigan offense that doesn't score a lot of points. Yes, I know they put up 50 against Northwestern, but that's Northwestern. So can Michigan run the football? Is Colston Loveland going to play? I'd say, he's going to the draft. He opts out. Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant, Will Johnson, Colston Loveland were hurt for the Ohio State game. But if Kenneth Grant, Mason Graham, Colston Loveland and Will Johnson don't play, it's going to be, I think, a pretty tough go. It's going to be a pretty tough go for the Michigan Wolverines. This is an interesting matchup. Michigan is 7-5. Right? They were 6-5 going to that Ohio State game, taking on a 9-3 Alabama. That was the first team out of the playoffs. So even before you get to opt-outs, Alabama, I think, was probably a much better team than Michigan. So this is a little bit of an odd bowl matchup, but I understand you want to get brand on brand. And with Michigan sitting there at 7-5, a little bit better after that Ohio State win, that's what they wanted to do to get both of those teams on the football field. Citrus Bowl. I think the Citrus Bowl is going to be one of the more competitive games out there. You've got two ranked teams, two teams that are sitting there at 9-3. The South Carolina Gamecocks against the Illinois Fighting Illini. So when you talk about South Carolina, when you talk about defending South Carolina, it starts and ends with Lenora Sellers, the young quarterback. He's been able to do things with his legs, certainly with his arms as well. They've played pretty solid defensively as well. So I think a key for Illinois in this specific game is going to be containing Lenora Sellers. You got to keep him in check. You got to keep him in check. Now, what does Illinois have to do? Pat Bryant's going to the NFL, right? So that's going to be a loss. Of course, in that bowl game, this ever since the loss of Caden Fagan this year, it's been kind of a running back by committee. I'm very curious to see what this Barry Lunny Jr. offense is going to look like without Pat Bryant, right? He has been an all Big Ten wide receiver. He's been one of the best parts of their offense. Let's see how Illinois' offense can move the ball against South Carolina. There's a potential that it could certainly be a challenge as well. And you got January 3rd, the Duke's Mayo Bowl. Will P.J. Fleck be the latest Big Ten coach to be doused with Mayo, Minnesota, taking on the Hokies of Virginia Tech in that bowl game as well? It's hard sometimes to look at these bowl games and really break them down because you don't know who's going to play. I remember kind of covering I remember covering bowl games these last couple of years, and we don't know who's good. Sometimes I don't know who's going to play a day or two before the game, but here we are. Here we are at this point in time right now. I'm going to get to some of your comments here a little bit later on during the show. Thanks, everybody, for stopping by a live edition of Big Nation. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, do it. Do it. We've got all sorts of content coming down, getting ready for the college football playoff games. We're going to be covering portal. A lot of transfer portal coverage this week. I did something brief about Miller Moss, but, Nebraska, there's a lot to talk about with Nebraska and what they've lost in the portal certainly right now. So we're going to be talking a lot of portal certainly coming up this week. Also follow on Twitter at Big Ten Ted over there. Last thing I want to talk about before I open it up here, we've got a new head coach into the Big Ten coaching fraternity. It might have slipped under the radar for some of you. Barry Odom is set to be the next head coach of the Purdue Boilermakers. Barry Odom comes over from being the head coach at UNLV and really turning that team around, back-to-back appearances in the Mountain West Championship game for the Rebels. Of course, Barry has coaching experience at the Power 2 level. When he was the head coach at Missouri from 2016 to 2019, he had some 500 seasons. He did a solid job over there. But when he kind of gave way to Elijah Drinkwitz, that Missouri program took steps up certainly from there. Here's the first thing that slaps me in the face about Barry Odom. And it's not Barry Odom specifically. It's who could be joining him right on his hip pocket. It's his offensive coordinator at UNLV, and his name is Brennan Marion. Brennan Marion. The go-go offense over there at UNLV set all sorts of Rebel records, and he is a highly coveted offensive coordinator. I'm sure he still is. There's no guarantee that Barry is going to bring Brennan over here. Barry he's got a defensive track record. So this would be the second consecutive head coach that Purdue has hired that has a defensive background. But before I get back to Marion, I want to finish things off really here about Barry. I think the thing about Barry, even though he's got a defensive background, like you look at Purdue over the years, offensive coaches and an offensive philosophy is what succeeds at Purdue. Ryan Walters, when he came in to be the head coach of the Boilermakers, he needed to nail that offensive coordinator hire. Didn't happen. Didn't happen. You hired Graham Harrell, a definition of falling up. And then you saw what happened. Towards the end of this season, Ryan Walters himself was calling offensive plays out there for the Boilermakers. So I think this comes down to if they can get Brennan Marion to come to West Lafayette. I think that's the biggest part of this hire. Because what he was able to do from an offensive perspective is big time. So if I'm Barry, of course I got to recruit players to stay. Purdue has been suffering a ton of losses in the transfer portal. Dylan Thieneman, their great safety, entered the portal. Jerron Tibbs, one of their leading wide receivers, entered the portal as well. Marcus Davila, right, a promising young quarterback prospect for them, entered the transfer portal. Of course, you want to try to get some of those guys back, but man, if he can bring Marion over with him, that now gets Purdue back some offensive confidence right now and reestablishing themselves as a really good offensive football program right now. And, in today's day and age of college football, a coach transfers from one school to another. Sometimes those players transfer from one school to another. So if he can find a way to bring those UNLV kids into West Lafayette, especially those, of course, that have eligibility left and those that played a significant part in this UNLV offense, this could be a Purdue team. Now, it's going to be tough. The cupboard is extremely bare at Purdue. The thing about Ryan Walters is he recruited well, but on the field, this is a team that just didn't develop, right? Off the field, on the trail, I thought Walters did a good job, like top 30 classes, which is really good for a place like Purdue. But then on the field, it certainly did not go very well. So he's got to kind of redo everything. But this is a great opportunity for Barry Odom to kind of get back into Power 2 coaching and possibly resurrect this team. I know Purdue is in an extremely difficult and an extremely bad spot right now. But this is college football. You can swing this thing pretty quick. Where is Purdue going to be from a financial investment opportunity? I know we're going to have the settlement, right? We're going to have a portion of money that's going to go into paying these players now, but you still need that investment. You still need that NIL investment for Purdue. It might be a little bit more on the basketball side. So if they can get it more on the football side, that's certainly going to help Barry Odom. Man, if he can get Brennan Marion over there, that is going to be a big time addition for this Purdue Boilermakers football team. Fun stuff. Let's wrap things up with talking about some comments here from the Duck Knight. That quote, "There are no elite teams. It's been Oregon since October 12th. Agree with that. Some people are going to look very foolish when we become the Oregon Goats." I mentioned the tough path that the Oregon Ducks have to go through, but it's certainly going to be very interesting to see if they can do it. This is the path that they have to go through as well. A possibility of Ohio State, Texas, and Georgia possibly in the national championship over there as well. This is from Darius, kind of humorous here. "Congrats, Barry Odom. You get no NIL money. Maybe it's going to the Hoop Squad. Let's see if you can turn water into wine. Good luck." That's kind of what it is right now for Barry at Purdue. It is going to be a significantly steep challenge. We've seen it happen at Indiana. Not saying that means it'll happen at Purdue, but we've seen some pretty big flips. But I think that this is going to be a process at Purdue. If Barry Odom, now going 1-11 in year 2 was pretty bad, but if Barry Odom goes 3-9 in year 2, are we going to be recycling another head coach in West Lafayette? It's a weird balance that administrators have to have in modern day college football, where you have to have, you have the ability to get results sooner with transfer portal and flipping rosters, but there's also needs to be some patience that needs to be exerted, certainly at these lower level programs as well. Andrew Mueller bringing in his opinion on the college football playoff. 5 conference champs should automatically be in, but not necessarily have buys. Yeah, it should be seeded like the NCAA basketball tournament. Okay, you could take 5 conference champions over here, 7 at-larges. Let's put all these 12 teams into a pool that get here in various ways, and then let's seed them correctly. That's how it should be, but it's certainly not that way. It's certainly not that way. If Oregon, this from Darius, if Oregon runs the table, it's a wrap. Drop the mic. Oregon would be considered the best champion ever. It's quite possible. It's quite possible. Ram Spencer, he's sitting in the kind of a little bit of the same boat that I am. He's really sick of the disrespect that the Ducks have been getting. There have been a lot of people out there that have said, well, there's no nationally elite team. Where Oregon going undefeated in the Big Ten Conference and beating the teams that they did, like Ohio State, like Penn State. They should be getting respect. They should be getting respect. But maybe they're not. Right now. And we'll finish the things off with BK. At least Oregon is at the Rose Bowl, sort of home field advantage. You know, I mean, if they play Ohio State, that's been Big Ten territories, certainly down there as well. So, yeah, it is on the West Coast, certainly out there. You got to imagine a lot of Duck fans are going to be traveling down to Pasadena for the Rose Bowl. All right, folks, as I said, we are going to be having a ton of transfer portal talk this week. With the portal opening on Monday, with the portal opening tomorrow, you got to imagine there is going to be a lot, and I mean a lot of news coming down the pike. All right, this wraps up this edition of Big Nation. Want to thank everybody for tuning in here this evening. So, until next time, I'm Big Ten Ted. We will see you in the next one.
Thank you for watching and listening to Big Nation. Make sure to subscribe and follow Big Ten Ted on X, YouTube, and podcast platforms to stay in the know on all things Big Ten football.